BrainX community was formed roughly 2+ years ago with the idea that we wanted to spread the message of machine learning in healthcare for good. As you can see, this was our photograph from the very first session that was held. And we have grown up to be a 2,000 plus member international community. We have a couple of web pages through which we share content. I'll go through that. We have a very active LinkedIn group with the name of BrainX Community. And we do have these monthly live sessions, which we used to do in person, as you can tell from the photograph, but we went virtual even before the COVID hit us. So we were ahead of COVID times. If you go to the webpage, the brainxcommunity.com, as I said, the idea is to share scientific information to promote education, collaboration, and understanding. So 3 different areas: the connect, data, and the learn side, which are the 3 prime areas there. Connect, which we have gone online. This is from one of the prior photographs from one of the prior sessions, which was live, but now we do this through Zoom. And then for those who missed part of it or otherwise and want to share the session information, you could share that information through our YouTube page where it's uploaded. As I mentioned, very active LinkedIn group where we share a lot of scientific material, upcoming meetings, and additional content. And then there's a learn section where we put in curated information where all the scientific articles that we feel are important, categorized. Of course, we can put all the articles there, but the links are available so that you can go directly to the publisher's site. One of the issues that has been constantly recognized for researchers, for innovators, and for learners is the lack of access to data. So we have this special data section where any for majority of the open source data sets in healthcare, there is a link available to you. So of course, we can't directly have data available to you there, but links to all these open source data sets. I would argue this is the largest repository of links, and now it is annotated too for different specialties, which is available to you so that you can do your research and hopefully collaborate with other people across the world. Again, COVID-19 required special access to data. So there are a lot of COVID-19 data sets, including one that we curated ourselves. That is the team BrainX curated ourselves. We did go to Europe, and we have a team that is there in Europe. There is a list of journals which are focused on this. So if you need to know, which are the journals which are focused on AI in healthcare, here is a curated list that is available to you. And some of this work has fostered transcontinental collaboration. We work with our friends in India. Dr. Pritesh Sethi is one of the physician engineers at IIIT Delhi to do some of the scientific work. And that's been one of the important ideas behind formation of BrainX community. And just recently, in the last week, we launched our podcast series called BrainX Talks. So please check it out on Spotify with the work of Dr. Ashish Khanna and Alok Kothari. So Dr. Khanna is a physician, and Alok Kothari is an NLP expert and engineer from IIT Kharagpur. They joined hands to help launch this podcast, proving that man plus machine is better. Again, some of the different areas where our content is there. And with that, I'm going to introduce the moderator of our session, the BrainX Community Live January session. That's Doug Meil. He's currently the portfolio architect at Ontada. And Doug has a pretty impressive past, having worked in healthcare with IBM, with Exploris and various different companies. So has a deep understanding of machine learning, AI, and data in healthcare. He's also the founder of Cleveland Big Data Group that meets monthly. That group was founded in 2010 with more than 3,000 members. It has been an amazing hit, only hit by COVID. Otherwise, as you can see from the photograph over there, the sessions have been amazing. He has had great speakers over there. So if you're in Cleveland and you want to be part of one data group, I would highly encourage you to connect with this group. And this group covers various computational topics, analytics, infrastructure, and scientific topics with that too.
That's a pre-COVID picture. So just to make sure that the medical folks don't start giving me a finger wag there, that's a pre-COVID picture.
That's true. That's true. But it was amazing. I was there, and I remember these were like some of the amazing sessions. And there's one session coming up, right, Doug, on February 1st. Do you want to talk about that? That's
correct. So we are having a redo. We had a bit of a scheduling a mix-up for a meetup that was originally scheduled. The January meetup was scheduled for January 25th. It was this Monday. We are going to have it. We're going to have the January meetup in January 32nd, which is otherwise known as February 1st for calendar purists. So it's on this Monday, and it's Paco Nathan, who is a noted O'Reilly author, who does a lot of talks on NLP and AI and machine learning. He's got a couple of books out. He did a talk with a series called Just Enough Math, which is available on O'Reilly, and he's also done a lot of talks at Strata. So I'm excited to have him talk about Project Ray, which is a project for distributed Python and an AI and machine learning.
And of course, the two panelists that you're excited and looking forward to listen from, Dr. Frank Papay. He's the chair of and professor of Dermatology and Plastic Surgery Institute here at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. He's also the co-founder along with me of BrainX and BrainX Community. And he's the face of the face transplant in US and across the world, featured on National Geographic. He has numerous patents. He has led the academic department for many, many years, very well published. And I think I can go on and on, but I'm going to stop there. And joining us is Professor Vipin Chaudhary. He is the current chair for the Department of Computer and Data Science at Case Western Reserve University, and that's a named chair position over there. Again, extensive background and history in computer science, AI, and working with healthcare groups. He also started the National AI Research Institute at National Science Foundation as part of the National AI Initiative based on the Act of 2020 by White House. And again, to add to his background, he has been part of numerous startups in the past. I think I can probably spend an hour going through his brief bio, but I think I'm going to stop at that and acknowledge that we are blessed to have him here in Cleveland, and especially have him join us on this wonderful panel today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug to initiate the discussion over here.
Super, thank you. So question number one for Dr. Papay and Professor Chaudhary. What excites or motivates you about AI applications in healthcare?
Well, Professor Vipin, why don't you go first and I'll follow.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Piyush Mathur for inviting me to this, and also Doug Meil to moderate this panel. So healthcare is so important, so broad, and so encompassing in daily life that it's really hard to ignore doing that well. And AI and machine learning, and I tend to use those terms interchangeably, it's shown to be quite effective in many areas that appear to be similar to problems one faces in healthcare. So to me, it makes a compelling case that we should explore AI to its full extent in healthcare. It's also very hard, There's inherent interdisciplinarity in it, and the sheer potential impact, I think, is what motivates me working in this area.
Well, to follow up on that, being an end user of both AI and machine learning, I think the utilization of either supervised or unsupervised algorithms is endless. I mean, you can just walk down the hall and think of 100 different things, and it's like drinking from a fire hose. So, from a surgeon's point of view, I'm interested in the AI part of this, where I think the future of learnable robots and image recognition is associated with learnable robots. On the ML side, I'm excited because of the sense of discovery that can happen on the ML side, both mostly in the unsupervised side, but there's a lot of research on both ends, and so the impact is, Professor Chaudhary rightly pointed out, is a legacy that I'd like to leave behind and help contribute as both an end user and pointing in the right direction where I think we can have the most impact on using both AI and the OR and machine learning on the decision making end on the other side. So they're two great components of sort of the same family that the impact is unmeasurable.
Thank you. Question 2, where is AI in healthcare amongst the stages of evolution, especially compared to other industries?
Well, I'll take this since I'm involved in the healthcare industry. We are neophytes. We are archaic. We are basically, it even started, if you can compare us to quality control as compared to, the automobile industry. We were way behind and we're just beginning to catch up. With AI, we're just beginning to really scratch the surface. And it was basically a catastrophe like COVID that's really augmented things in healthcare, such as telemedicine, and now utilizing predictive analytics for where the next pandemic is going to come from. That's really augmented the use of machine learning. So I would put us basically less than 1 year old now.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Papay rightly said AI in healthcare in general is sort of starting out, but I think it's on a steep climb. It's behind the consumer and industrial areas. So if you look at the investments in health AI and machine learning companies, so between 2011 and 17, almost $2.5 billion were spent. Now, in the digital health space, in the last year, 2020, about $15 billion were spent, which was 66% more than the previous year. That's 2019. So that growth is amazing. And the more investments we have in digital health, there's going to be a bigger need for AI to manage and interpret all that data. And of course, I don't take all these numbers very seriously because there's so many technologies which do not fall under healthcare that will directly impact healthcare. For example, NLP, natural language processing, right? That's being used in many, many different areas, but the impact or the use of that in healthcare is growing, and I think that will greatly improve how the time management, both in the front end and back end, is going to happen. Clearly, there are robot-assisted surgeries and fraud detection, virtual assistants, telemedicine, which Dr. Papay talked about. COVID has really accelerated that. So I think it's going to increase tremendously. 66% is tremendous growth. If we can continue close to that path, I think we'll make tremendous progress.
Just to add what Professor Chaudhary said, he's absolutely right on. The other thing that, as far as anybody, online now that are looking at new ventures, is really, the aspect of resistance and barriers to creating a company and new ventures that deal with machine learning or artificial intelligence. And so that plays into number one is the FDA, and number two, the CMS. Are you going to? Is it safe? Where does it really lie? Inside or outside the purview of the FDA? And then how are you going to get paid for the utilization of that? And that is why I think in Silicon Valley, and Doug, I'd like to get your comments on this. I think that is another reason why there's so much big investments in startups in AI, because it's an outlier. It lies outside those two main barriers of healthcare innovation and creating of new ventures. What's your opinion about that?
Thank you, Dr. Papay. So from my experience as a software engineer, not a clinician, but having been in healthcare now for 12 years, one, just like you said, Piyush, is access to data is what's the data set that you have to work with? How do you establish ground truth? And again, NLP has been mentioned several times because so much of there's so much data in semi-structured and unstructured sources, and how do you make sense of that, and how do you know that you've made sense of it correctly, and then monitor those processes. So speaking of healthcare being on the just going up the ramp, there's of AI and machine learning, there are practices which haven't even been established yet in terms of data operations. People tend to think of AI and machine learning and NLP as just code, but these are processes that also need to be managed along the way to make sure that that they're tracking to what you expected. And then continually revising those models. And then lastly, how do you get these insights back into the clinical workflow where they can be used by clinicians? And so that last inch, so to speak, to the glass is oftentimes where startups have a hard time, right? Because there's only a few major EMRs that have that on the glass experience. So, and I'm not going to name names, but how do you get the back end insights where the clinicians can use them? So,
well, I think one thing, just to carry the discussion on a little bit further, I think one thing is important is once you develop algorithms, and whether most likely supervised, because that's the most common used right now, you've got to make it legitimate. Okay. And I think the legitimacy behind it is comparing it to really what the gold standard is. And that's the old fashioned, dumb and double blind randomized trials. And then you got to compare it with the real world, sort of like you experience in that, in a double blind randomized study, whatever you're coming up with that matches that with the algorithm. And I think that has not played out very well in the medical literature. There's a lot of articles that are reported, mostly not in peer-reviewed literature. Most of the peer-reviewed literature stuff in AI and machine learning are mostly reviews and some specific things and clustering and things like that. But as far as comparing it back to legitimatize, whatever algorithm you come up with, whatever predictive analysis you can come up with, I haven't seen very many of those. What I'd like to ask Dr. Chaudhary, what are his thoughts about that? Coming up with something, you're trying to prove that it works, but putting it back to sort of the old-fashioned trials. Have you seen any papers like that are out there? Or do you think that's a good thing to do in the future?
Oh, certainly. I think the big problem is to get health data and to get the outcome data. There are lots of issues. There's privacy issues, security issues, and there's standards issues. Everyone has data in their own formats. No one wants to share. And even in the algorithm space, people don't want to share their techniques. Now, if you look at with image-based AI, so radiology and digital pathology are good examples. They've had good success in terms of predictive stuff there. It's extremely hard to get the complete data set. Just looking at an image is only half the work done. So I think the challenges are not only technical, but then also about trust. How do you get people to accept what the algorithm tells you? And even technically, how do you explain how your black box has actually come to this conclusion? So there are lots of technical challenges, there are lots of social challenges. Are there studies? Yes, there are studies, but they are very narrow. They look at very specific aspects, and it is these big clinics like Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, and so on, who have end-to-end data. Right? Yeah. You need the EMR data, you need the whole suite of data, and over a period of time. And with deep learning, you require just tremendous amount of data, right? And that's another problem in the medical area. Not all the disease-specific data is large. That is lots of instances, and that makes it very challenging. Now, the expectation of humans, and this is from examples in other domains, they expect the machines or the algorithms to actually outperform the humans. Yeah. So if your algorithm is going to give you 99% accuracy, that may not be good enough. But for a human to do that, that is perfectly fine. So people are a little more forgiving towards the humans. And you can see that in all kinds of examples with autonomous driving and so on. But I think there's no substitute to doing that. There are challenges. I think the privacy and security challenges, they make some progress and then they have setbacks. With all the social media aspects that are going on now, I think we've had a setback in sort of privacy. So people are even more concerned about getting their data out. And then the issue about who owns that data. Mm. So there are a few of these challenges that we have to solve to really get AI in healthcare.
You know, just to add with that, you brought something up that, again, as an end user and, you know, highly interested, you know, the medical legal aspects of, let's say you come up with a predictive algorithm that's 99.9% accurate. And as a physician, I use that algorithm to decide on what chemotherapeutic agent I give this patient or what drug or what surgery I do, no matter what. And it's wrong. And the patient then sues the doctor, or does he or she sue the person who comes up with the algorithm or the company that emanates from that? How do you think the medical legal aspects of machine learning in decision-making in healthcare is going to play out?
That's a tough question. I think you are probably better prepared to answer that. You deal with that day in, day out. My sense is that you can't do it in silos. So someone has to be responsible. So I think the idea that the algorithm is going to replace, or the AI is going to replace a medical doctor, I think is a little far-fetched. And if you do that, then they take the responsibility, and I think it makes sense then to sue the company who has that. But I think for a long time, we are going to have the doctor being responsible. So it is a joint effort between the doctor and the AI. And so I guess the doctor has to be responsible in terms of having that oversight.
You know, I do agree with that, but I think there also has to be, you know, informed consent. And we give that for every patient we operate on, every new, you know, experimental surgery we do. You know, it's ad nauseum. We give it every day multiple times. But in the future, there's going to have to be an informed consent, which is basically educating the patient that I used machine learning in my decision making to assist in your treatment, no matter what that may be. That's something that I've never seen, but I can see there's going to be a case somewhere down the road where, just like the HIPAA laws with protecting data, personal data, there's going to be another law of saying you're going to have to divulge that you used a particular algorithm in the decision making of this particular case. I have never seen it, but as a futurist, I imagine it coming down the road. So.
Piyush, do you mind if I ask a follow-up question to that line of conversation?
You're the moderator. You can ask any question you want.
Sorry. I already ruined the flow by asking if I could ask the question. So how is machine learning not already there, in the sense that if you have a risk model, for example, that's a form of classification, right? So in terms of profiling patients, like, aren't we already there for at least the population analytics and maybe perhaps some of the diagnostic cases? You know, like, are we already neck deep in machine learning already?
I can take this.
Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah.
No, answer after.
So I think what is already being done is fairly simple. So if you can explain the model very simply, a basic regression model, those are very easy to understand. Those are widely used. The problem is when you have big models, like the deep learning models, where you have hundreds of layers. So it's truly a black box. You give an input, you get output, and amazingly, the output is fantastic. You compare it with real scenarios, seems to work really well. It is there that the problem lies.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I think, you know, some of the challenges are going to be, you know, the algorithms may have unintentional biases built into them. And if we become more reliable as end users to those algorithms and the outputs, and we don't double check it and triple check it and try to, you know, find any generalizations or biases or data set shifts in that, you know, again, it goes back to the medical legal aspects. Who's liable for that? And I, you know, it's going to lay on who's going to make the final decision. So that's going to be the physician or the surgeon. So we do use it now. I don't think we're as reliable as what we are going to be in the future. We're going to get more and more reliable. A fine example, you know, I mean, 20, 30 years ago, every physician had a stethoscope around their neck, and every physician had to read an EKG. Now, you know, the EKG and the heart rate, you pick it up from some type of wearable monitor, and the EKG gets spit out, and there's an algorithm that, you know, actually most of them was developed at Case Western Reserve years ago in the biomedical engineering department. And they say, okay, you've got a, you know, a left bundle branch block, you know, and the doctor signs off on it. Did he listen to the heart? Probably not. Did he read the EKG? May have not. But he's the legal responsible agent. So I think most physicians are getting more and more reliable on those simple data analysis, and it's only going to get more and more. And again, it's going to be who's the responsible agent for that final decision in the end. So I think we're just at the beginning of it, but it's going to happen.
So for the next question, thank you. Could you talk to us about some of the trickiest problems you've encountered in either in the clinical areas or in research work, and discuss lessons learned?
I'll let Dr. That's a big question. I'll let Dr. Chaudhary answer that one while I ponder this one.
Okay, yeah. So I don't know. It's the trickiest, but certainly one that is was very eye-opening for me. So we got some MRI images when I started working in the low back pain diagnostics area, and these images from our partner, and we got pretty good accuracy, somewhere around 95%, and this was to detect herniation. Um, and this was the case with few other pathologies as well, but it was very hard to get close to 99%. So when we got a little deeper into it, we saw a lot of reports. There was significant inter-radiologist and intra-radiologist differences. The differences were very high, up to 40%. And so the conclusion was really that the metric we were using was inaccurate. So percentage accuracy with the data set I had was just comparing how close we are to that particular radiologist. What we really needed to see was almost in computer science, what you would call a Turing test is, can you distinguish between the radiologist and the AI program? And this is very relevant for MRI images because there are no gold standards there. So, and we looked at other measures, and the kappa coefficient, which is a statistic that is used to measure inter and intra-rater reliability. We started using that, and that makes a lot more sense.
You know, from my end, I can think of two problems. A couple of years ago, I went out to Stanford to look at their program on identifying melanoma, and we were using it in our department of dermatology. And from there, it was from Sebastian Thrun's lab, and one of his postdocs was working on it, and we utilized it and found out that the data set that they used, you know, had some confounders in it and was picking up things that we didn't associate with. And so we had to go back and still are working with them to sort of clean it up. So I think the way that the data, and these were images, and we didn't realize that they got most of their images off the internet, and they didn't get it from, again, standardized data that came from medical photography. So again, where the data comes from and how those algorithms were trained is important, and really going back even before the algorithm, find out what data are they looking at, and the supervised way that they're looking at it. And that produced this unintentional bias. And so that was one thing that I learned a couple of years ago. And then recently we're working on surface registration of unique surfaces in spine surgeries, which Professor Chaudhary, I'd love to talk to you about it someday. And we're looking at it for real-time registration in spine and bone surgery. And the noise in real life is different than the noise that we produced in the model. That we're getting better at it, but you know, there's how do you reduce the noise is something that I think, at least in this one particular algorithms that we're identifying, is something that is an ongoing process, because whatever you produce in the lab, when you bring it to the OR or you bring it to the cadaver lab, it's never exactly right. We're getting better at it, but again, the key is how do you attribute noise and then validate what's true, and at least in this surface registration. So that was another thing that we're learning right now too.
Yeah, so talking about real world, I have another interesting case. This is back in 2003 when I was working with a neurosurgery group, and we bought a mobile intraoperative MRI machine. This was about 0.2 Teslas. And after a couple of usages, the neurosurgeons, they refused to use it, even though as engineers, we saw a lot of benefit to it. So I used to go watch these surgeries in the OR, and it was very clear the way the magnets would protrude and the way the surgeon would have to sit. It was not comfortable at all for these long surgeries. And it's pretty surprising how the company actually brought those machines into market without doing these field tests. Because there's no way you could be sitting in that particular position and doing these surgeries. Of course, this led to some of our work in trying to predict brain shift without using an intraoperative MRI.
Those are fantastic stories. I just had to, both of you commented on gold standard as as something that requires nuance and experience and opinion and deep domain experience, and it's not an absolute thing that you can just grab on a shelf. I've had the same. Your stories are better. I'm not going to say mine, but I had a very similar experience where I'm at with trying to establish gold standards for NLP, and that we keep having to explain to people that it's something that has to be established on a case-by-case basis. Those are fascinating stories. Lastly, actually, no, second to last, penultimate, should doctors learn to code or engineers see patients with clinicians?
I'll let Dr. Pepe go on this first.
Both. I'll take C, which is both A and B. I think doctors have to understand, and Piyush and I talk about this all the time, Dr. Mather and I, and Kamal in our group. I think I'm very blessed with being associated with people a lot smarter than I am, and I'm learning from them. I call it reverse mentorship, and I think it's both. I think we have to understand, what it is, machine learning is, and how you can utilize it. And as an end user, we can help engineers really, as Professor Chaudhary rightly pointed out, in a real world situation, what works and doesn't work. On the other hand, we have to speak the same language, and we have to develop strategy together. I can't say that enough. It's this, there's going to be different algorithms that can solve the same problem, but it's the strategy in developing those algorithms that is more important sometimes than whether the algorithm works or not. And that is in the real world. That is, again, comparing it to the gold standard. That is cleaning the data and what type of data you use in those algorithms. So I think you got to do both. I think the doc should learn how to code, at least understanding how to develop strategy and algorithm development. And I think the engineers need to work in the OR with the docs, or work and see how patient flows, and see the stresses and strains it takes to input an electronic medical record. And just to say this before I hand it over to Dr. Chaudhary, the number one burnout of a physician today, the number one is electronic medical record. The number two is prior authorization in getting the medical record to get the data out of it. That's the number one and two burnout. And so, if you're going to increase engagement of docs, decrease cost of healthcare, and improve the quality of healthcare, I think one of the key issues is really, I think one of the answers is NLP, because it will do both. I'll hand it over to Dr. Chaudhary.
So, well, I don't think doctors need to learn to code, right? Though the current generation, the medical students, most of them know how to code. But I think it is more important for the doctors to actually be exposed to AI and machine learning and to ask the right questions. They need to know about the models, the usefulness for certain types of data, the appropriate use of metrics, and so on. And I think in terms of the engineers seeing the patients with clinicians, I think it's just better to have teams. So you want to have convergence, as the funding agencies have started using this term, which really means deep expertise in both areas. So you want convergence of doctors and AI, right? So, but then that's very hard to get in one person. So I think looking forward, a doctor is really going to be a doctor plus AI. The AI could be initially human. Who knows, later it's just going to be an algorithm. But it does help, as I saw in my case, for engineers to actually get involved in the clinical aspects to learn about some of these boundary conditions, which you would not know if you were not embedded.
Those are excellent comments, and I completely agree. I was fortunate to have just that experience last year where I got to spend a couple hours with an oncologist actually seeing patients, and each time they would ask the patient, is it okay? He's here from from McKesson, and he's working with the EMR, and is it okay if he stays with the visit? And all the patients fortunately said yes, and I just kept my mouth shut and watched, and I would get the longest, shortest sideways glance from the oncologist when something would bother her in the EMR, and she'd be like, fix this. She didn't have to say a thing, but you could see the mouse. There was too much mouse movement. There was too much clicking. And I think it's important wherever possible for software engineers to get more empathy for their users by watching the users and seeing it in front of an actual patient is a humbling experience. The last question is, what is your outlook for AI in healthcare for 2021 and beyond?
Acceleration. Again, I think COVID it really, pushed on the gas pedal. So I think you're going to see it more. I think a lot of investments are going to occur on the new venture end. You're going to see the utilization go much broader. And you're going to see it used for research more and more often, which is very exciting to me. So acceleration, I would say, would be the single word.
And I think there's also other good news in the sense that the OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy Director, has now become part of the US Cabinet, and that's Dr. Eric Lander, who's leading that. The National AI Initiative Act of 2020, that is continuing as a National AI Initiative Office. The people working there clearly in the AI space, the broad sense of using AI for many, many different things. I think all those investments, as Dr. Papay talked about, COVID accelerating that, I think we are at a very good place. I think we've been hearing about precision medicine for over 2 decades. I think now with all the digital health initiatives, all the data that we are getting, I think we're getting close to making tremendous progress in that. So I think the growth has been tremendous. It's accelerated a lot, but we still have to be a little wary of all the promise, right? So we've heard of Haven, the joint venture between Amazon, Berkshire, and JP Morgan, right? There's 3 big companies who just within 2 years sort of gave up on trying to disrupt that health space. So I think I'm very positive, but there's still going to be challenges. It's not going to be a couple of years. It's going to take a couple of decades.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think you're absolutely right. I was amazed when they shut that down, Professor Chaudhary, but it didn't surprise me. I mean, I thought if anybody could do, they could do. But if you read the press reports, it was that they realized there was a misalignment of incentives. That the doctors were misaligned with the insurance company, was misaligned with the government. So if there's going to be any sort of large changes in healthcare, it's going to be government aligned first, and then everybody will have to fall into place. And there's been some initiations with the insurance company and the government over the years, but it's never been pushed through enough, in my opinion. So it's not to align incentives do you get this sort of collective genius or this collective action that's going to happen, and it hasn't happened yet. So I think with AI, I think it can help that, where you can, save money on the clinical end, but not lose money for the healthcare providers, and yet still save money and maybe make money also on the insurers. I think that's the only way you're going to drive a lot of this acceptance on both sides.
So we've reached the end of the questions, and Piyush, I think it's back to you for the questions in the chat.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with Dr. Khanna's question, and Doug, maybe you are well positioned to answer this too. Knowing this huge untapped potential with healthcare AI, why is that, for example, EMR or EHR entities is still not AI friendly, or at least we are not seeing that on the clinical side? So any thoughts from you, Doug, and from, of course, Professor Chaudhary and Dr. Papay?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Papay and Professor Chaudhary on this one.
Well, from my end, if you look at the data sets, and Professor Chaudhary said it at the beginning of this discussion, there is the legality of who owns the data. And does the patient own the data? Does the doctor own the data? Does the hospital organization own the data? So that's one problem that is not completely clear. Right now, it seems like the hospital and the employees, i.e. the physicians, own the data, and they're very careful, knowing that it's very valuable to share that, and have a lot of restrictions, plus the government overlying that with regulations, i.e. HIPAA and whatever. And then how do you clean the data? How do you make the data agnostic? And then how do you standardize the data is another thing. So, before you even develop algorithms and standardize those and compare it with, apples to apples with the same data sets, you've got to share the data sets. And that's a big problem right now, at least that I've seen. And, Dr. Mather and I have tried to get data sets from here and there, and I say so far it's difficult. Hopefully it'll be less difficult, and but that's the main problem that I see. Professor Chaudhary?
Yeah, I think so. The big challenges in machine learning have been computing and data. The computing aspect is, quite solved, in the sense we have tremendous amount of computing. You can run very complex models, and that has worked very well in areas where you have a lot of data. The issue in healthcare is data. And I think Dr. Papay pretty much covered why that is a problem. And unless we can solve that problem, I don't think we can utilize all the progress that we have made in machine learning so far.
Yeah, sounds like data everywhere, but not enough for us to model. And actually, that's a perfect segue to the next question that Dr. Kare had from UAE. So he joins us from UAE. It's somewhere around 2:30 a.m. or so over there, or 3 a.m. over there. And his question was, how do you see the future impact of increasing data coming from wearable devices? And maybe, the patients will provide data directly instead of through being given through EHR. So thoughts on the velocity of increase in data, the quantity with use of wearable devices?
Well, I think that's a data deluge. There's a ton of data that with the increasing use of wearable devices. And again, the great thing about if it's a wearable device, depending on where that data is transferred, really that is owned by the patient. So, if you're thinking ahead, you can have a data bank that is verified and legitimatized by, whatever agency, whether it's a government or an organization. And then that data could be collected in there, and then you could have a data, bank that could be sold to various people that want to use it for different testing capabilities, i.e. pharmaceuticals or whatever. But yeah, you could create a data bank utilizing wearable devices. Haven't seen it yet, but it's something that could be developed in the future.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the data from these devices, actually in many areas there which are not so regulated, it is being used. I personally use it for, my watch. I use it for my own purpose. People are trying to use that. People are using apps in iPhones or their phones to do a lot of different things. But those things are regulated. Are the physicians actually using that to make diagnoses? I don't know.
Yeah, a follow-up question or follow-up comment or question related to that also is the approach from some of the organizations like National Science Foundation. We have seen the plan laid out by NIH, which is like if they're going to fund, they do want to make sure that the data that is gathered is made available to other researchers. So probably, some of these organizational changes need to take place where the funders make sure that the data that is being gathered is made available to other researchers too. So Dr. Chaudhary, any thoughts or directions there from NSF or other governmental bodies?
So yeah, I can talk about what we did in NSF. There, the focus or the questions I would have was on software. So you develop software, and do you have to make your software not just open source, but free to use? And I was always against that idea. And the reason is, people have the right to take their IP and to commercialize their IP. And with data too, there are more nuances than just making it open. When you make it open, you have to take care of all the HIPAA regulations. You have to have all the privacy and those kind of issues taken care of. Simultaneously, there is work going on in trying to do computations without infringing on privacy. So there are a lot of these things happening. There are good techniques out there where you can encrypt data and work in that space. They're just terribly computationally expensive now. I think in a few years, we'll probably be able to deal with those problems. But I think in terms of methods, whether we have to make the methods open and certain types of data, I think even at NSF, we tend to ask people to make the data available. It's not mandated though. NIH has, I think, taken a much bolder step in forcing people that they have to make their data available. But again, there are shortcomings there. The standards are not properly set. So you can put your data out there and it's really not usable by everyone. So, but I think it's a step in the right direction there.
That's great. A question by Dr. Maheshwari, like how do we make these two worlds come together? The machine learning, computational science world with the engineers and the physicians, and just in the example over here, like it's just a street, that separates us. How do we make these two worlds of healthcare with clinicians and the needs, and similarly on the other side, the engineers come together? So any thoughts on that? I guess that's what we're trying to do here.
Well, yeah, I'm going to make a pitch. You join BrainX. I mean, that's the beginning of it. If you join BrainX community, you have a community of both physicians and computer scientists and data scientists, and we intend to grow that more and more. So, a little self-serving here, but I think that's one way. And then everything in life is relationships. So I think if you have a good idea. And you're not too much of a jerk, you develop a good relationship with somebody that you can partner with. That's how you collectively make something great and something bigger than what you are. So I'm totally into the BrainX community, and I think Dr. Mather and I see Kamal's on and everything, have done a great job putting this together. And I think, you know, we are open and welcome to share in our community and really bring people together just like that, bring physicians and users together with computer scientists and data scientists, great people like Dr. Chaudhary.
And I would say industry partners too, because I think there is a huge untapped resource to bring our industry partners in here too. I'm going to move on to this next question and direct that to Dr. Chaudhary. This was from Dr. Kocher. He was asking about have you used pair data or any experience using pair data, because that is different from EHR data sometimes, more of an administrative data. Any thoughts on that?
So personally, I have not used.
Okay, Dr. Papay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more tricky. That administrative data is not deep enough and not granular enough many times. I know there was the CMS AI challenge that was there a year and a half ago, and a lot of groups have worked on that. But those have been some of the challenges, you know, using the pair data, because they don't have direct access to all the EHR data and the granularity thereof. But they do have some of the outcomes data, you know, so which the EHR may or may not capture. We think about like different hospitals that the same patient can go to, but the insurance might capture that data, not necessarily captured by a single hospital entity.
So I think that granularity is very important, and we encountered that in our, lower lumbar these surgeries. It's very hard to get outcome data, and then what was the actual procedure that was done. So a procedure saying back surgery is not very useful. It has to be more precise, and so I think having fine-grained data is absolutely important if you have to get down to real diagnoses and also impact based on that.
We are just a minute or so away, but I think David Casper has had some really good comments to this. I do want to take his question over here, and that's a great question. What single big idea do doctors wish that AI programmers understood better? So, Dr. Papay, do you want to take that one?
What was it again?
What single big idea do doctors wish that AI programmers understood better?
Well, that's a big question. There's so many. I think they have to understand the reality of how the environment the doctor works in. And I would say, going back to the electronic medical records, and again, that being the biggest problem for burnout and malengagement and disengagement for physicians, if they understand how that is a burden, in mining that is a burden for doctors, I think both the input and the output of that electronic medical record, if that could be somehow much improved, which it can through many different mechanisms, through AI and machine learning, that would be a big boon to all of medicine. And so I would say that would be my number one thing. How do you utilize both the input and the output of EMR to really make the physicians more engaged? That would be my single most difficult problem to solve.
That's great. What about the opposite? I think that question is for Professor Chaudhary. What single big idea do AI programmers wish that doctors understood better?
It's a tough one. I think that it's not an easy problem to solve, because the problem sometimes is not well defined. I think if you can define the problem very accurately, I think then we can make more progress. But I think just in the domain itself in medicine, sometimes the problems are not so easily definable. And engineers in general, or the methods, are based on having very precise metrics, precise problem. And that's how they develop methods.
No, that's a great point. Doug, I think we're pretty much out of all the question and comments and time. Any final thoughts from you? You might be on mute,
I'm
Doug.
muted. That was embarrassing. So I just want to thank you for letting me be a part of this on the panel, and it's been a terrific experience just listening to this. This is fantastic. So thank you for everybody that's attending. And Piyush, I also wanted to you had your slide in the beginning of the very first BrainX meeting, where you had the group of people from the very first one. So rule number one of running a successful meetup of take pictures, because if there's no pictures, then meetup never happened.
That's right.
Well, so always take pictures.
We're going to have the video loaded up on our YouTube channel so that you'll be able to see that. So it's going to be beyond just pictures. But again, I want to thank everyone, especially our panelists, Professor Chaudhary, Dr. Papay, and our moderator, Doug, for the wonderful session. I hope this is a great start to this new year, where we all come together and collaborate to help AI improve healthcare. And ultimately, that's what impacts us, right, as humans. So we look forward to growing this opportunity. And the video of this will be posted on the YouTube channel. Please help spread the word about BrainX community and join us in building this community a better forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Right.